Welcome as you settle in to our seventh session of our Amplify Voices of the Global Majority series, and focusing on food and environmental justice. And my name is Miles Newton, and I'll be your host this evening, along with my co-host Jessica Duravaj, on this continuation of our journey through the week. And tonight we get to welcome the amazing Leah Penniman, who will be giving a presentation on Black Earth wisdom. And as you know, Kripalu has been joining forces with these change makers from around the globe who are working to dismantle inequity and mitigate harm while stewarding the planet and prioritizing collective wellness and trusting interdependent liberation for us all. And throughout history, voices of the global majority, Black, Indigenous, people of color, have been at the forefront of breaking down barriers of systemic issues that affect both the planet and humanity while ushering in radical change, whether that's been bringing yoga to the West or fighting injustice on the front lines of society, as the people you've been with this week have. And now is a time that requires us to listen and to heal historical wounds and continue doing things differently. So we're entering into this continuation of this work as an act of community care, because as we know, none of us can be well unless all of us are well. So again, welcome. We're inspired to be sharing this collective space with all of you. And it is honor that we are virtually gathered today, located in the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts on the unceded territory of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohicans, and on behalf of Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health. We invite you to link through the chat and learn about what your lands that you're joining us from and the Indigenous inhabitants that have stewarded those previously. And please take a moment to share with us in the chat about those. And today, the lands that we are joining from, Kripalu stewards as a nonprofit educational organization that's dedicated to empowering people and communities to realize their full potential through the transformative wisdom and practice of yoga. And this Amplify Voices series has been made possible because of the generous gifts of our donors. So we thank them, and we thank you for your presence with us tonight. And as part of this collective space that we're sharing tonight, we have shared some agreements in the chat as well. So please take a moment to read through those and acknowledge that by being in this space with us, you are opting into those, and that we thank you for that. And so before we begin this awesome night, let's just take a moment to take a breath in and a good exhale to kind of settle in, and then take two more when you're ready to kind of drop into the space. So in through the nose and out through the mouth. Thank you all. Welcome.
Thank you, Miles. Welcome, everyone. I was sharing with Leah just before we started that when we were dreaming the summit, the director of creative strategy at Kripalu, her name is Iset Rose, and Iset emailed me and said, Leah said yes. Leah Penniman said, yes, we can do it. We can do this. This is going to happen. And so I want to honor that. I want to honor so many of the facilitators this week that evoked her name and her book and her influence. And so it's my honor to introduce her to you all tonight. Leah Penniman is a Black Creole farmer, mother, soil nerd, author, and food justice activist from Soul Fire Farm in Grafton, New York. She co-founded Soul Fire Farm in 2010 with the mission to end racism in the food system and reclaim our ancestral connection to land. As co-ed and farm director, Leah is part of a team that facilitates powerful food sovereignty programs, including farmer training for Black and Brown people, a subsidized farm food distribution program for communities living under food apartheid, and domestic and international organizing towards equity in the food system. Leah has been farming since 1996, holds an MA in science education and a BA in environmental science and international development from Clark University, and is a member of clergy in West African Indigenous Orishas tradition. Leah trained at Many Hands Organic Farm School in Massachusetts, and internationally with farmers in Ghana, Haiti, Mexico. She also served as a high school biology and environmental science teacher for 17 years. The work of Leah and Soulfire Farm has been recognized by the Soros Racial Justice Fellowship, Fulbright Program, Pritzker Environmental Genius Award, Grist 50, and James Beard Leadership Award, among others. Her books, Farming While Black, Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land, and Black Earth Wisdom, Soulful Conversations with Black Environmentalists, are love songs for the land and her people. As always, Miles and I are here to support you all tonight, on and offline through this journey. You can direct message us in the chat. You can email us at onlinesupport@kripalu.org, and there'll be space and time for questions towards the end of the program. So without further ado, it is our absolute delight and pleasure and honor to welcome Leah Penniman.
Thank you so much, Miles and Jessica and all of the Kripalu family for having me. It is a deep honor to be among you this evening. I am zooming in right now from the farm, and I quite literally have dirty knees because it is the time of year for planting, for tending the soil, tending the wonderful beings that we get to live here, also in Mohican territory. And so thank you for giving me this opportunity to share with you. I am so excited about the Black Earth Wisdom Project. And so tonight we're going to dive into some of the lessons that Black Earth Wisdom has brought to bear, and also have an opportunity for you all to connect with each other and reflect on some of these lessons and how they connect and apply in your own life. And I'm wishing right now that we were all on the land together. And of course, we're on Zoom, but in absence of all being on the land together, we're going to, as I'm speaking, kind of imagine that we're roaming through the fields of Soulfire Farm. And so I'll be sharing some images with you, just a carousel of images, to help set that intention of or that feeling of being on the land together. So we'll do just a moment, give me just one moment, and we'll go ahead and get that started. So by way of background, I know that I'm seeing that I know many of you and you're already connected to Soulfire, some of you, but Black Earth Wisdom is a project of this community, so it feels important to ground in that, and just want to share briefly that we are an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm that's dedicated to uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system, which is a huge objective. And our part in that consists of 3 lanes, like 3 foci. So we, this team of 15, half of whom are here on the land and half of whom live all over Turtle Island, doing some of our virtual and movement work. Our 3 lanes include one to take care of this 80 acres of rough and rugged mountainside land that we're so honored to steward since 2006, and to use our ancestral farming practices that pull carbon down out of the sky and put it into the soil where it belongs, that increase biodiversity, and that pull forth so much food and medicine, despite predictions to the contrary that you can't farm in Grafton, it's just not agricultural land. We use our Afro-Indigenous practices of raised beds and compost and no-till, of cover cropping, to build soil over time, to build organic matter over time. And all of the food and medicine that we grow is distributed to people who need it most in our community, primarily through our Solidarity Shares program, a doorstep delivery, no-cost program for survivors of food apartheid. The second lane where we work is in equipping and inspiring and resourcing the rising generation of Black and Brown farmers. A lot of folks on this call, know that farmers have not gotten a fair shake in this country. Our whole nation is really rooted in stolen land and exploited labor. And that exploited labor story started in some ways with chattel slavery and morphed into sharecropping and convict leasing and H-2A and bracero programs. And so to support farmers from communities of color in being able to access land and credit and capital and training, and to be able to feed their communities in dignity, is a huge part of our work. So we're, we got training programs like here on the farm and virtually, even internationally with international solidarity programs. We have an 18-month fellowship. We got the Soulfire in the city. And then our third area of work is rabble rousing for systems change. So working to change laws at the state and national level so that farm workers get a fair shake, so that we are moving forward with reparations and rematriation, that we have non-extractive credit and new institutions like land trusts and co-ops that can support our community. So that's the context in which Black Earth Wisdom was born. And Farming While Black was our first book back in 2018. And it was very much like the how-to, right? It's like the history of Black agrarianism and how do you plant okra and how do you run a youth program for system-involved young people? And if you're a white person, how do you act in solidarity with Black farmers, right? So it's super practical. And there's a little poetry splashed in there. But Black Earth Wisdom, I'll tell you an anecdote in a minute, really came out as this need that we have societally for a deeper why. Why bother, right, with compost and polycropping and feeding your community if the horizon is so bleak and dismal? Like, what is the deeper why, and what is that deeper worldview shift that we need in order to not just survive but to thrive as a species? And so I'm going to call an ancestor into the space who actually inspired Black Earth Wisdom and tell you a little bit about why. But I just want to prep you because I'm going to also ask you to call some ancestors into the space in the chat. So as I share these stories, be thinking about which ancestors in your lineage, whether, blood lineage or your chosen fam, have inspired your own connection to the earth. So this story is about one particular ancestor, Dr. George Washington Carver. A lot of folks know him because he was famous for inventing a lot of things with peanuts. He's a Black agronomist at Tuskegee University in the late 1800s, and quite literally had thousands of new inventions related to agriculture, which incidentally he refused to patent because he believed in the commons. But a lot of folks don't know why he was so obsessed with the peanut. And it's because it's a legume. And legumes have this amazing property of collaborating with rhizobial bacteria to pull nitrogen out of the air and fix it into the soil. They fertilize the soil through breathing. And if you can harness this potential, it has the capacity to heal degraded soils. And he was seeing that, under chattel slavery, the soils in the South were just ravaged by monocropped cotton and sugar, and so and tobacco. And so he was like, we need diversified horticulture. We need these nitrogen fixing legumes. We need some compost in here. We need mulching. We need to rotate our crops. So all of these technologies, which are indigenous and including Afro-Indigenous technologies, were very uncommon in mainstream Western farming at the time. So he became the patron saint of organic agriculture, is what we call him. He's the great grandfather of the modern organic movement, which is often credited to white agriculturalists like the Rodale Institute, but they were only on the scene 2 whole generations later. But what's extra cool about Dr. Carver, I should mention this too. Albert Einstein considered him one of the 10 greatest minds in the history of humankind. So like not a small person in any means. And when his friend Glenn Clark asked him, where do you get your ideas for all of these inventions? He said, well, every morning I go into the forest in the pre-dawn hours and I talk to God through the trees. He said, nature is God's unlimited broadcasting system through which God speaks to me every minute, every hour, every day, if I just tune in to the right channel. And so here's this scientist who has such a deep spiritual practice that he's literally talking to flowers, he's talking to peanuts, he's talking to trees, and feeling that the divine spirit is instructing him in his scientific work through these conversations. And I got really curious, like, who else in the Black community and beyond, who else is receiving instructions from the earth, who still remembers how to speak the languages of the earth? And there are so many ancestors and contemporaries in the Black community who do exactly that, right? So elder ancestor Dr. Wangari Maathai, right, who was responsible for the planting of 51 million trees in East Africa, earning her the Nobel Peace Prize. Harriet Tubman, who was an herbalist, an orchardist, an ecologist, and a freedom fighter, who was able to liberate 70 enslaved people in part because of her deft knowledge of plants and forest. She also cured Union soldiers as an herbalist, right? John Edmondson, ornithologist who taught Charles Darwin about birds. Dr. Charles Henry Turner, a Black zoologist who was the first to demonstrate that insects are intelligent beings through experimentation. Hattie Carthen, tree planter, catalyst for the Brooklyn Community Gardens. Hazel Johnson, community organizer and mother of the environmental justice movement, and on and on and on. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment right now and think of who in your lineage, which ancestors have inspired you to have a connection with the earth. And go ahead and drop their names in the chat. And we'll just take 3 breaths together to honor these ancestors and bring them into the space. Ashe, Ashe, Asheo. We welcome you, Baba. We welcome you, Iya. We welcome you, Egungun. Thank you for having our backs. Thank you for showing us the way. Thank you for loving ourselves even when we forget how to. Thank you for reminding us who we are. Welcome, Egungun. So Black Earth Wisdom became a project of checking in about the voices in the Black community that remember ecological humility, that remember this art of listening to the earth. So I called up one of my elders, Dr. Claudia J. Ford. We call her Mama Claudia. She is an ethnobotanist and a midwife at Potsdam, SUNY Potsdam. And I said, Mama Claudia, do you talk to your plants? And she said, child, of course I talk to my plants. And so I had this beautiful conversation with her that became the first interview for Black Earth Wisdom, and asked her, well, who else is listening to the earth in this way? And so she dropped some names: Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, Alice Walker, Dr. Drew Lanham, Joshua Bennett. I called them up, we did some interviews and I asked them, well, who? And they dropped some names, Toy Scott, Rue Mapp, Dr. Lorette Savoy. And pretty soon there were scores of these incredible contributors. I had to stop at 40 because ink and paper costs apparently is a thing, says my publisher. But that's why at blackearthwisdom.org, there's a directory that points you to some of the folks who should be in the book, but aren't in the book, so that you can dig deeper. And I want to share with you this evening 3 of the most powerful themes that emerge from these conversations. I mean, I got to talk to Alice Walker. That's amazing, and I was crying all over my keyboard as I did these interviews. But there were 3 main lessons that emerged, and of course, many, many more details under that. So I do hope you get to enjoy the book. And after I share each lesson, there'll be an opportunity for you to engage with one another for just about 10 minutes in breakout rooms to discuss, how this theme applies in your own life. So the first one that I want to share is this idea of the earth as a sacred text. So this idea came up first when I was speaking with Audrey Peterman. Audrey Peterman is a Jamaican American elder and advocate for the national parks. And she's amazing. I mean, you talk to Mama Audrey, it's like light is just emanating from every part of her. She is so infused with gratitude. And she was saying, the first time she saw big nature, in other words, like the bigness of the national parks, was when she was out in the Midwest, and, the sky in the parks, in the Badlands and elsewhere, is unencumbered by light pollution. So the stars are vast and brilliant. And she was meditating on this experience and thinking about how there was a time when pretty much everybody could read the sky, right? You could look to the sky day or night. You could tell the direction with directionality. You could tell the time of year, the calendar. You could tell what the weather was going to be. You could read the stories of your people in the patterns, the constellations. And in that way, the sky was a primary source for people. They read the earth, the sky, as a primary source. And other contributors echoed this idea, right? Dr. Lenny Sorensen said there was a time when every farmer knew that you plant corn when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ears. That's when the soil is warm enough. So the oak leaves were a primary source. They were something to be read. And contributors added, the ice cores, the tree rings, the bird song. Dr. Drew Lanham has been tracking the song of birds over time and shows a trend that between when my grandmother was born and when I was born, 3 billion fewer birds are singing each day, right? So the bird song, the tree rings, the ice cores, the oak leaves, right? These as primary sources. But as humanity has become more urbanized, more disconnected from the earth, fewer of us are literate in the languages of the earth. And so, you know that child's game of telephone where one person whispers a message into someone's ear, who whispers a message into someone's ear, and so on, right? There's a distortion there, and it's fun. But when you're planning society's next steps based on distorted messages, it's no longer fun. It becomes dangerous. So we're relying not on the earth, but on a tertiary or quaternary interpretation of what the earth is saying in order to know which way to go. And Audrey Peterman challenges us, saying that one of the most important things we can do is to learn to read the earth again and to learn that the earth really has the wisdom that we need if we could just, as Dr. Carver said, tune into the right channel. Something that was fascinating about this idea of earth as text that I kind of took to my own level. So I'm what they call a double PK. A PK is a preacher's kid. So both my parents are clergy. So I grew up very steeped in a very progressive religion, but still very steeped in religion and spirituality, and the sense of going back again and again to a sacred text. So whether it's the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Odu Ifa, you know, the world's religions have both oral and written sacred texts, and there's a way that you read them, of course, with reverence, but also with an acute attention, right? You look at the literal meaning, then you look at the metaphorical meaning, and then you look at the esoteric meaning. And this practice of reading these layers is called exegesis. Exegesis, if you went to divinity school or rabbinical school, you're gonna be doing exegesis all the time. And so I got very interested in like, well, what if I did an exegesis of just part of the earth, right? And as I was looking at how to conclude the book, I was walking in the woods on a wintry day with the icicles tinkling and the shimmering off the lake, and I tripped over a rotting log. It was a white pine log. And I decided to just sit there and meditate with this log for some time until it revealed its esoteric layers of meaning. And these esoteric layers, I won't give away the whole exegesis final chapter, but you can look at it and say, oh, wow, this is a home for small and necessary creatures, right? You can say, this is a white pine and it blew down this way, so there must have been a storm around this time. But even deeper, you can look at, well, how is this tree nourishing others in its life, and how is it being nourished? And even deeper, how is this tree part of all the cosmos, right? What is the long story of it? How does it show us impermanence? How does it show us non-self? And so the earth and every element of the earth is a deep teacher when we read her as text. The good news is, it's not to say that none of us speak any of the languages of the earth anymore. When I was interviewing Yonette Fleming, B. Anderson, and Toshi Regan, who are incredible musicians among other talents, they were saying there are 2 languages that we all still speak in common with the earth. And those 2 languages that we can build upon are song and silence. And it took me a minute to understand this because, I'm not a musician myself. I wish I were. But we actually learned our music. We learned our songs from nature. For example, the ruby-crowned kinglet taught us the full octave interval. The canyon wren taught us our chromatic scale, and the hermit thrush taught us our pentatonic scale. The elephants of East Africa taught the Hutu and Tutsi people how to incorporate super low tone frequencies into their songs, as did the volcanoes of Vanuatu teach the people of Tanna Island. So there are so many ways that we exchange with nature through music and also with silence. The Mbuti people of the Congo, for example, really deeply value silence. They believe that when the forest is quiet, it is called ekimi, and that is a source of peace. And the silence is when the ancestors speak to us. Silence is when we receive the messages of truth from the earth. And I like to imagine that John Francis Planet Walker intuited this. So for folks who don't know, he's an amazing, amazing Black environmentalist and elder. And John Francis Planet Walker, or Planet Walker for short, witnessed the devastation of the 1971 oil spill off the coast of San Francisco. And on the spot, he swore off motorized transport, a commitment that he kept for 22 years. And that then additionally took a vow of silence during that time that lasted for 17 years. And during this time of no motorized transport or fossil fuels and no talking, he walked across the nation advocating for environmental protection, earned a PhD in land management, and wrote the Oil Spill Act of 1990. So this idea of song and silence is echoed in Shelton Johnson's book, Gloryland, where he wrote, "Wilderness is just a word, and the wind got no use for anything that come out of our mouths except songs or prayers. Only then are we speaking from our hearts, and are we worth listening to? Otherwise, we should just be quiet and let the trees and sky do the talking. The wind's been talking since the world began. I've been listening to it since I was born, and I ain't bored yet." So I want to turn it over to you in just a moment. So again, I'm going to be sharing 3 themes that came out of listening to brilliant Black environmentalists. And the first being that the earth is a sacred text, speaking in languages that we have a beautiful obligation to relearn. And so I want to turn it over to you. We're going to go into breakout groups in just a moment for just about 10 minutes with a few folks to talk about this idea of reading the earth. And so share with one another, what has reading the earth meant to you in your own life so far? And what are your aspirations around the ways that you hope to be able to read nature and read the earth going forward? So we'll go ahead. I'll just pause this share. We're going to go ahead into breakout rooms, and we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
Opening rooms now.
What's up, glorious beings? So good to see you back in the main room. Let's take a moment and just put some thoughts in the chat. What's one takeaway that you had from your conversation in your breakout room? Go ahead and drop that into the chat. Someone was talking to turkeys. That's amazing. I need to hear more about that. And turtles. Incredible. Smelling the soil. Yeah, deferring to indigenous wisdom. Ashe, absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So I'm going to just resume our little walk through the lands while we get into the next second of 3 lessons that that we learn through these Black Earth Wisdom conversations. So the second lesson that came through was this idea of earth as teacher, which of course is connected, right, to the earth being a text, right? Because you read to learn, and then there's a way of wanting to lean into emulation of best practice. And this is something that has been really, really powerful for me to think about the earth as teacher, because, right, we human beings, we're taught in some ways that we're somehow like the pinnacle of evolution or like the crowning glory of creation. And the reality is that we are the younger siblings here on the planet. The hawks, the trees, the rocks, the mountains, they were here first. They're elders. And so we owe some deference, some respect, some care in the direction of these beings. And so what happens when we tune in and emulate? Well, I was a science major in college, so I was always taught that nature's primary modus operandi is competition. And it's all about this sort of reductionist sense of survival of the fittest and getting as much as you can and like passing on your genes. And while certainly competition is present and natural selection is real, it turns out that cooperation is a much more predominant force in nature than competition. And, you know, the science is catching up to indigenous knowledge in that way because like we all already been knowing that, right? But over 90% of species actually rely on a mutualism, a symbiotic mutualism in order to survive, whether that's the mycorrhizal associations between, you know, plants and fungi, pollinator relationships, or even like the bacteria in our gut. We have more non-self cells in our body than we do, you know, the cells of human cells because our bacteria are so prolific. And so much so, the mutualisms are so common that scientists are now starting to even question the very idea of an individual organism as a unit of natural selection. Natural selection is acting on groups of organisms, assemblages. So that's fascinating to me and very much dovetails with the ideas that we grapple with in the Kripalu community around non-self, around interbeing, around interdependence, right? And it's fascinating to me too how many seemingly counterintuitive behaviors exist in the animal kingdom, right? Like why would a vampire bat regurgitate its own blood in order to save other bats from starving that it's not even related to, right? Why would a prairie dog cry out to warn its peers of predators, even if it means it's more likely to be eaten? Ants and bees give their lives for their colonies. Birds migrate in a V formation, picking up the draft for others. So many examples of the ways that relationships of mutual support happen. And perhaps the most well-known, but also like undeniably cool example is, of course, the forest as a superorganism. We know that trees that are on the edge of the forest or a bit taller, they get excess sunlight so they can produce more photosynthate, more sugar. And rather than keeping that all to themselves, they actually share the sugar through an internet of fungal hyphae of mycelium so that other trees, whether they're related or not, kin or not non-kin, can get some of that sugar. And there are minerals being traded, there are messages being exchanged. The forest acts together. And one of the powerful ways that we know this is through the coordination of masting. So like a tree that produces nuts, if it produces nuts all by itself one year, the squirrels are going to eat up all those nuts and it won't be able to reproduce. None of those nuts will sprout. But if the trees can coordinate with each other so that they all mast at the same time, they're going to overwhelm the herbivore population and all of them are going to get to have some of their seeds sprout and bring forth new life. And they coordinate that through the communications in the fungal network, like super cool, right? So lesson number one for nature as teacher is nature is cooperative, nature is generous. We are part of nature. We can emulate that cooperation and generosity. Nature is also really queer and trans, you know, so a lot of folks will try to make an argument that in favor of heteronormativity or the binary by saying it's natural, but what's actually natural is queerness. Over 90% of flowering plants have bisexual flowers that have both pollen producing and seed producing parts. They're called perfect flowers, right? There are tomatoes that are sexually fluid that can change their sexual expression depending on the time of day. There has been same-sex intimacy documented in over 40 species of animals worldwide. So among the birds, we see queer love in black swans, albatrosses, blue ducks, mallards, penguins, vultures, pigeons. Among the mammals, we see gay intimacy in Amazon dolphins, bisons, bats, elephants, giraffes, marmots, lions, bonobos, gorillas, macaws, orangutans, monkeys, sheep, and hyenas. There are queer lizards and queer tortoises and queer dragonflies and fruit flies and even bed bugs. So nature as teacher teaches that we must embrace the beauty of our queer and trans siblings. Another lesson that nature offers us as teacher is one of it's like bodhisattva never despised, right? Of non-hating. I was really moved to hear from, Dr. Drew Lanham, who is the bird scientist, the ornithologist who I mentioned, and he said, he would go out to bird and constantly these white birders would be like, "Who are you? Like, do you belong here? What are you doing here?" Right? And he said, interestingly enough, no bird, no oven bird or cardinal ever paused in their dawn song declaration to ask me, "Why are you here?" And so many Black Earth Wisdom contributors echoed this sentiment, like, the earth doesn't spit or judge or hate. The flowers don't close up just because I walked by. The earth does not have capacity for hatred. And in his 1873 speech, Frederick Douglass remarked, "The grand old earth has no prejudice against race, color, or previous condition of servitude, but flings open her ample breast to all who come to her for succor or relief." And we know that nature has this not only no capacity to hate, but an immense capacity to heal. Like, she is there to compost our trauma back into hope. You just need to put, the bare feet in the earth, the bare hands on the earth. And, science is also catching up with this intuitive knowledge. We know that when we hang with the earth, we heal. But there was this incredible study of 900,000 people that showed that when you grow up with green space, you have a 55% reduced risk of developing a psychiatric disorder in adulthood. Again, access to green space in childhood, even after correcting for all other factors, race, income, is going to cut in half your chances of having a psychiatric disorder. And it's important to note, right, that 75% of children in communities of color are growing up without access to green space. So we need to talk about, the environmental justice component here, and the fact that it is a human right to have access to nature, to heal, to be well. So the question I want to ask you all in just a moment is, so you can prep yourself, is, what has nature taught you, right? What has nature taught you? And I will tell you, I had this moment for myself pretty recently. You can put this in the chat, or if any of you are farmers or gardeners and you've pruned before, just drop a note in of what you've pruned on your farm, right? So I was out, we were pruning our raspberries and our grapes, kiwis, and trees. We were doing some pruning, and it's painful, right? Because you're cutting off all of these shoots that look really robust and beautiful, and you're just but how, right? And in the past, I would let that concern kind of overtake me, right? And not prune adequately. And the result is a hot mess, because trees that are unpruned, they can't get light and air through them, and so they're more prone to disease. You have to have no fruit set. If you don't prune out your fruits, you're going to have branches breaking under the weight of the fruits, right? So it's actually really important. And it becomes this metaphor for me of my own life, where I tend to do too many things, right? I tend to have those branches that I'm not cutting off, that need to be cut off. And so my central leader, so to speak, that apical meristem, can't grow in the way that it needs to grow in that focused way. So that's one of the small ways, that's one of the small things that nature taught me just this week. As I was pruning, it was reminding me of the importance of really investing resources strategically and being willing to let go of the things that ultimately will not serve, even though they feel real tasty and wonderful in the moment. So in that vein, we still have another lesson to go, but I want to ask you all to spend a little bit of time with one another. Again, we're going to have new breakout rooms. Well, 10 minutes together. What is it that nature has taught you? So I'll go ahead and pause this, and we'll go into our rooms in just a moment. Peace, y'all. Welcome back to this main room. All right, we're gonna light up the chat again with just some share outs. So we were just talking about what it is that we're learning from the earth. So if you could share either what you shared or something that inspired you that you heard, go ahead and fill up the chat with a reflection from that time in the breakout room. All right, let's see what y'all got. Resilience, tenacity, imperfection. Oh, a lot of imperfection. That's awesome. Not rushing, but getting it done. Right, I think about water and the way that water is so gentle and persistent and yet carves out canyons, right? Connection. Oh, this is dope. Y'all are amazing. Mint is proof that the earth loves us back. I love it. I love it. Okay, so I'm really excited to share with you this third theme that came out. So we're gonna keep walking around my farm while we talk. So this one is the idea of Earth as kin. And I was living in Ghana, West Africa in my early 20s, and I apprenticed myself to the Queen Mothers of Manya Krobo. The Queen Mothers are the guardians of culture, the sacred groves, the managers of conflict, the stewards of orphans, the leaders of ceremony. They're just like all around really badass. And they asked me one day, is it true that in the United States, a farmer will put a seed in the ground and they won't pray or sing or dance or pour libation or even say thank you to the earth, and then they expect the seed to grow and nourish them? And when I admitted that this is often true, they said, well, no wonder you're all sick, right? You're all sick because you treat the earth as a thing and not as a member of your family. And this is something that has really stuck with me because I would identify it as perhaps the fundamental discrepancy between Afro-Indigenous and Western thinking is whether we see all beings as kin or not. And I'll put forth that non-kin thinking is what leads to both racialized oppression and earth ravaging, because it's the severing of family, it's the relegating of others to non-person that makes possible the enactment of violence and oppression on the other. And embedded in the theory of white supremacy is the theory of human supremacy over nature. And this is a Western invention. There's nothing inevitable about this, right? Perhaps best described in 1846 by Senator Thomas Hart Benton, who asserted it would seem that the white race alone received the divine command to subdue and replenish the earth, for it is the only race that has obeyed it, the only race that hunts out new and distant lands and even a new world to subdue and replenish. So this ethos of subduing, right, the land has gotten us into a lot of trouble, right? We're currently in the Holocene mass extinction. That's the most rapid loss of biodiversity in the history of the planet, with 1 million species threatened with extinction in the coming decades. Our seeds are in trouble. We've lost 75% of our crop varieties in the past 100 years, and the corporations are controlling 82% of our seed supply. Our oceans are in trouble. We have 400 dead zones in our ocean. We have more microplastics in our ocean than stars in our galaxy, 500-fold. We've lost 90% of our global fisheries, right? The climate's in trouble. We're on a fast track with the glaciers in retreat and the oceans acidifying and extreme weather events and floods and droughts and hurricanes and tornadoes, both from the burning of fossil fuels, but also through soil tillage and land loss. And the people are in trouble too. People are part of the body of the earth, and that trouble is disproportionately falling on Black and brown folks. We know that environmental harms like air pollution and flooding and heat exposure and living near chemical facilities and power plants and burning trains and leaded pipes disproportionately impact African American and Indigenous communities. And we also know that the environmental benefits like access to nature disproportionately excludes communities of color. And so this idea of nature as kin is so deeply embedded in Afro-Indigenous cosmology. For example, in the Yoruba religion of Nigeria, but also of the diaspora, every tree, every river, every mountain is a deity, is a face of the divine, and is propitiated as such. And there are sacred groves called Igbo Etile and Elujo Boboforo, where only worship is allowed. There's no extraction whatsoever. So even though it's put forth that the national parks are like America's best idea, which is problematic anyway, because the parks are like stolen land and they've excluded people of color for almost their entire history. But it wasn't an American idea. This idea of having a forest reserve where only magical and sacred activities is allowed is truly ancestral and ancient way of understanding our relationship. And also in Yoruba cosmology, there's a sense that, or a belief that we actually have a covenant with all of our kin. And there's a story of the breaking of the covenant that is quite, it's a fun story, but it's also a challenging story. So there's this character called Mr. Byforce. And so Mr. Byforce invites over to his farm a bunch of friends for a collective work party. And each of them asks, like, they're like, well, come, but just make sure that my sworn enemy isn't there because I don't want to get gobbled up, right? So for example, Hen had a habit of gobbling up all of Grasshopper's children. So Grasshopper was like, I don't want Hen to be here at this collective work party. And Hen wanted assurance that Wolf wouldn't be there at the collective work party, and so on, right? And not only did Mr. Byforce lie about the guest list and like basically bring everyone's enemies like right there, but he lined them up next to each other, and then he withheld food and drink, which traditionally in a Nigerian work party there's a lot of food, so they became famished and irritated and they couldn't really hold themselves back, and eventually they just pounced on each other, like gobbling and snatching and hurting. And then dewdrops came. Dewdrops fell. Dewdrops are the embodiment of the god of wisdom called Orunmila, the Orisha of wisdom, to remind them of their covenant of moderation, that actually it's forbidden to take more than you need. It is forbidden to just wantonly destroy others. And so with the dewdrops falling on them in coolness, they remembered and restored their covenant. And we need to tune into this, right? Because if you think about it, from the deepest ocean trenches up to the tallest mountains is this narrow band of habitability, only 12 miles thick, called the biosphere. And this is the tiny life raft that we share with all beings. All beings share this tiny life raft, and our collective thrival depends on restoring this covenant of moderation, which assumes our kinship with all beings. Was very moved by the way that Dr. Joshua Bennett and Dr. Ross Gay tied together this idea of eco-kinship with racial justice and with the kinship of all beings. And I sort of opened this piece by talking about non-kin thinking leading to both white supremacy and racialized oppression. But they take it a step further, talking about how we are united by the fact that we breathe, and we are united by the fact that we struggle to breathe. And so when we talk about the oceans as the lungs of the earth, it's the little tiny phytoplankton, right? That provide over 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. But the phytoplankton are gasping, proverbially gasping for their breath because of the warming ocean. They're declining 1% every year, right? And who else is gasping for breath? Right? Eric Garner cried out 11 times, I can't breathe, gasping for breath. And who was listening? And this is tied together elegantly in a poem by Ross Gay that I'll share with you, called A Small Needful Fact. And it goes like this. A small needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants, which most likely, in all likelihood, some of them continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for all of us to breathe. So united by breath, united by kinship. And Dr. Josh Bennett puts forward that this sense of kinship persisted in Black Americans despite enslavers trying to use it against us as a weapon to degrade our humanity. And so let me break this down, right? We're taught that our dignity as humans comes from setting ourselves apart from other earthly beings. We are different than animals. We are not animals. We are not plants. To call me an animal is an insult, right? And so when Black people are listed alongside cows and pigs and horses as property, as animal, the idea behind that is to say you are not worthy, right? You are not a person. But Josh Bennett looked through the literature of our people with a keen eye and actually has this really fascinating conclusion. He says, Black lives are those that are often positioned as outside the human-animal divide altogether and placed elsewhere in a zone of non-being, where the kinds of extravagant violence so often deployed against and solely reserved for animals is made allowable, deemed necessary in order for white society to function at peak performance. But I say, the animals are my kin, my truest kin, since we all belong to the earth. Call me an animal. The lie of whiteness is that we can separate ourselves from the earth. And considering animals as co-laborers, as friends, as partners in the field, Black people resisted a social order predicated on confinement and open to a more radical sociality grounded in a desire for a world without cages or chains. It follows that prison and police abolition has environmental roots, viewing human life as a part of all life on earth. So if this be true, right, then the degradation of the earth, when we destroy the earth, it's actually a manifestation of self-hatred. If we are the earth, if we are part of the divine body of the earth, in destroying the earth, we are destroying ourselves. And so I'm curious, like, what if we could see ourselves the way the divine body of the earth sees us, right? As beautiful, as sacred. And what if we learn to love and emulate our elder siblings, the hawks, the black bears, the wolves, in a practice of sacred biomimicry? So I have a few exciting things for you in just a moment. We're going to have like an open conversation as a group. I have this poem that summarizes the whole book that is performed that we'll share with you. But I want to send you to one more breakout room conversation on this idea of earth as kin. And I'm curious, not only how does this show up in your own life, this idea of like being in kinship with the earth, but also how do you think your community would be different if we treated the earth as a family member? So it's two parts. This idea of kinship with the earth, how does it show up for you? But also, how do you envision that your community would be different if we all embrace this idea of the earth as a family member? So I'll go ahead and pause my share and we will go into our last breakout room for the evening to talk about this theme.
Opening rooms now.
Thanks, welcome. Welcome back, family. So we are going to take some time now for some open conversation, questions, and sharing. And at the end of that time for questions, I'm going to share with you this wonderful poem called Mama Nature Told Me that was created by my womb and soul sister, Leah Penniman, who also created the beautiful cover art for Black Earth Wisdom. And I asked Naima, can you create a poem that summarizes this entire book? And of course, she's magical, so she did. So definitely stay tuned to see that. But I want to go ahead and open it up for any questions or any sharing that you all want to do related to this theme of the wisdom that we learn from the beautiful Black Earth.
And if you'd like to share, you can either raise your digital hand or put it into the chat, and I'd be happy to read that. Peggy.
Can you hear me? Yes, wonderful. Thank you. So the process, I'm a process person. The process we went through, the 3 questions, the sequencing, the breakout sessions, um, brought it all together for me in that, and also the photo, I call it the movie you were sharing with us, Leah. I don't know if the individuals, if these individuals knew each other coming at the farm, or were some of them related, or were they all strangers? But what it brings to mind is that if we focus on a common theme, in this case it was farming, because there's so many different body sizes, body types, colors, all this diversity didn't matter. Folks were building, loving, teaching each other. You get all that from the photos. And in terms of the earth as a teacher, is or what has the earth taught me, is we need just the bare minimum. We don't need a 10,000 square foot house, or a 10 or 5,000, or we don't need all that. And the earth shows us we need some basics, and the ability to just find that commonality and just be humans.
I love that so much. And just I'll say in this sort of process question, so people when they come to the farm, by and large, don't know each other. Sometimes they'll come in groups, from a certain organization or with a family member or partner. And I think I don't want to give away all the credit like to the humans. There's definitely some intentional curriculum around community building and safe space agreements and orientation and grounding in. And also, like, let's be real, like when we are in common purpose on the earth, she has a powerful way of just weaving us together. And even the simple acts of like hoeing a row, planting a seed, harvesting, cooking a meal together, what Yrsa Daley Ward calls, well, I'll see if I can quote her whole poem. She says, I was born pulling food from the earth. I know where joy comes from, how to make it. So when we get to collectively participate in, or I was raised pulling food from the earth, when we get to collectively participate in pulling joy, there's a way that the boundaries, like you said, between like color and body size and age does become unimportant. I can see you in me. You can see you in me, right? So thank you for that.
One of the questions in the chat is, has anyone come across, or have you come across, a belief system where the earth is not female or woman when referenced?
Oh, great question. Yeah, definitely. So in Yoruba and Vodun cosmology, the earth is all gender. I think it's often in the translations and like the Gaia philosophy that the earth becomes only femme. But like take in Vodun, for example, the creator spirit is like Maulisa, the sun and moon together, or Aida Wedo Dambala. So like the snake, the serpent, and the earth together. And so there's a sense of an all gender or an agender expression for the earth that is a lot easier to express in non-English or non-Romance languages because there are not gendered pronouns in Yoruba or Vodun. So I would refer to the earth and all beings as Li, which is actually my preferred. I use all pronouns, but Li is the preferred pronoun because that's my ancestral pronoun, and it's it refers to everybody. So the earth is also referred to as Li in Vodun. But if anyone also has things to add, please do, because I don't know every tradition in the world, obviously. So we can do some collective knowledge share there.
And another, while we wait for some answers to come through in the chat, another question is from Deborah.
Thank you. This was fascinating. I have always loved birds and found them to be beautiful and very expressive. And I loved what you said about how different human scales were modeled on bird songs. Where could I read more about that? That was just fascinating. I love that.
So I don't have the citation right in front of me, but it's chapter 7 in Black Earth, I think 7, Black Earth Wisdom is about song and silence, and it's got the citation. But if you don't want to read the book, which no pressure to read the book, you can just email me, love@soulfirefarm.org, and I can pull the citation for you for that paper, which I thought was fascinating. My son is a jazz musician, and I was like reading this paper while he was like practicing piano. It's like, Emmett, did you know that we learn all of our music from birds? You got to read this paper. I couldn't get him to read the paper, but he did think it was kind of cool. I will say, just because when we were in like the quote unquote faculty lounge while you all were in your rooms, we were talking a little bit about how you like the practical way to implement some of these things that can seem a little heady. And I know I said farming while black was the how and Black Earth Wisdom is the why. So we were purposely in the esoteric, but I will just say I also welcome questions about those practical things like, so how do you do rights of nature at Soulfire Farm in your co-op, or like how are you doing Black Indigenous solidarity, or what does it actually look like to ask permission of the earth when you're farming? Because there's all of these ways that we've tried to translate some of these understandings, into a context that is, it's racial capitalism and settler colonialism. So it can be hard to like translate some of these things into our day-to-day life. So I'll just say I also welcome if anyone's curious about that too.
And can you talk about bringing youth and young folks onto the land who have not had access to green space?
Yeah, for sure. So that's the heartbeat of our work. I'll tell this story of this one wonderful person named Dijor Carter, who's given me permission to tell his story. He's now a grown person, but he came to one of our youth programs, and like so many young people, was really hesitant to engage. He's like, there's bugs, there's dirt. Are you all slaves? Like, I'm not messing with this. Is a bear gonna eat me? I don't want to get out of the van. And the only reason that this child eventually got out of the van to come join the program is he figured it'd be better to die collectively being eaten by a bear than to die alone in the van being eaten by a bear. So he gets out of the van, and all these young men have, cute sneakers and stuff, and it's like muddy on the farm. So I told them, well, we're gonna walk, so if you don't want to get your sneakers dirty, like take your shoes off. So I think actually the picture of them, there's one picture that scrolled through of these young men like with their bare feet. So that was Dijor Carter's crew. They're going around the farm. They didn't listen to a word of the Torah. They were squealing as the mud squelched under their feet, as the toads hopped over, the snakes. It was just so sensory overload. And when we got back to debrief, Dijor said, like, Miss Leah, the weirdest thing happened when I put my bare foot on the earth. It was like my grandma came to me through my feet up to my heart, and she had passed away long ago. And I remember being a young child and gardening with her. She put like a worm in my hand and tell me it was a friend's, right? And I didn't think I had anything to do with this place, but I'm remembering that I do. And there's a little like tear in his eye. And the other young people are also talking about their grandmas and their connection, right? And so there was this real sense of the earth doing the work of expanding a sense of connection and belonging and possibility. And we've had thousands of youth come through our farm with little to no exposure and even inherited trauma, right? Because the land was the scene of the crime. The land is where the chattel slavery happened, and the lynchings, and the wilderness is a place of was and is a place of danger for our people in some ways. And so to see that the land was the scene of the crime, but she was never the criminal, and there is this capacity for reconciliation, has been really profound. And there's no substitute for direct experience. You can't just read it in a book. Like, we all need to touch the earth, and that's why community gardens are a human right. Green spaces are a basic human right. Transportation to get to big nature is a basic human right. So these are things we need to be advocating for and insisting on, that it's absolutely abhorrent, right, that 75% of children of color do not have access to green space. Like, that's criminal, right? So it's something we need to pay attention to.
And do you know of a group that's been successful at bringing farming gardens to prisons? And they have one being built in the middle of Amish farmland with no thought of gardening.
Hmm. It's complex, right? So just as like a coda, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention like, so the 13th Amendment prohibits slavery, right? Except in the case when you've been convicted of a crime. And so Black people have been locked up, often under strange pretense, loitering, vagrancy. And then in the late 1800s, were like forced to work the plantations under convict leasing. And this was such a huge part of the economy of the South that like 73% of Alabama state budget in the late 1800s came from convict leasing. So the idea of like farms and prisons is complex. So I just want to mention that it's very important when we do gardens or farms and prisons that there really is choice, right, for the folks who are incarcerated, that the people running the gardens have an understanding of sort of the complexity of justice involvement, and that the people who are farming are getting the benefit from that. Either they're getting paid a wage or they have their own garden plot and they can actually use the food and they're allowed. So I'll say all those things, right? Because there's some farm in prison projects where you're like, wait, this is no. Like, but the only one I've worked with is out of Bard College in New York. It's the Bard College Prison Initiative. And so I had the opportunity to be like a guest teacher. They have a horticulture program where you can earn college credit there, and there's some gardens. So I can say that one seemed like pretty all right, though it's certainly not an area of expertise for me. You're welcome, Stephanie. Any other questions?
Nan.
I just wanted to respond to the last person's question.
Please do.
The state of Maine has put in organic gardens in their prisons in order to feed the inmates. So rather than the inmates eating canned food or old food, they're getting fresh food. And in that, embedded in that, is teaching them how to be chefs and how to work in kitchens and how to grow things. And so when they're released, they have places to go. And while they're in prison, they're being well fed. So for anybody that's interested in that, if you Google state of Maine prison and organic farming, I think you'll probably find it.
Thank you so much for that. I can find it too. I had the honor actually last year of keynoting the launch dinner for that program, which seemed really exciting, but I haven't had any direct experience with it. So I'm glad that you brought it up. It was in my mind and I was like, should I say it? I don't know. I haven't really seen it, but it sounded like really exciting. And there were some chefs that were engaged and committed to exactly what you said about improving the quality of food for folks who are inside. And for all of you who don't know, the food in prisons is abysmal and leads to all kinds of health challenges for our beloveds behind bars. And the schools, yes. That's right. Tanisha, thank you for calling that in. It's so bad, right? You want to talk about it? You can come off mute and tell us.
Oh, okay. It's just I'm a teacher in New Jersey, and it's really bad. It's really, really bad. I just can't say it enough. There's some schools that are being progressive and they're reaching out to other programs that can provide more fruits and fresh vegetables, but a lot of the times they're getting their meals from these programs. I've seen a lot of kids that will just get bread with sliced cheese in between it. it's just not fresh. It's not fresh produce. And then our kids are struggling with attention, right? Our kids are struggling with maintaining their energy levels throughout the day. And part of it is the diet. They're in school longer than they are at home most of the times. Like if you're, depending on what kind of school you're in, you might be in school as early as 7:45 in the morning. And then if you're enrolled in an aftercare program or tutoring program, you might be in school till 5:30, 6 o'clock, right? And so you're at school Monday through Friday, majority of the day. And if your meals are not nutritious, if your meals are not whole foods based, you're not going to be able to sustain your energy levels throughout the day so that you can learn and explore and have fun with your classmates, right? And so it's really sad the way, that's all, I'm sorry.
Oh, don't be sorry. It's a situation
Yeah,
of food apartheid, right? Where,
yeah.
you know, depending on the color of your skin, your zip code, the budget of your school, like you're either going to have access to like fresh, nourishing, culturally appropriate foods or you're not. And there's huge implications, you know, for your long-term well-being, you know, your long-term, you know, cardiovascular health and mental health. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Is that Stephanie with your hands up? You can talk if you want to.
About kids. So I'm a writer, and I did an article a couple years, more than a couple years ago, and it was a local person who was doing a summer food program because a lot of kids rely on the food they get at schools, and she swore by cherry tomatoes because they were bright red and small. And she's like, there's no kid on the planet that will resist a cherry tomato. It was like one of her things. And I'm just wondering, with your experience bringing kids, you know, out into the dirt for the first time, sometimes the first time, and all of the gardens, is there something that is almost universally irresistible to even the most diehard Fritos eater?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. So we've had thousands of children come through our programs. And if they grew it, they will eat it 100%. Doesn't matter if it's like kale, kohlrabi, okra, hot peppers, scallions. If they grew it, or sometimes even if they picked it, they will eat it. So of course there's things that are like, we kind of line the pathways with like easy pick, quick eat things. So sugar snap peas, green beans, cherry tomatoes, husk cherries, which are those really good and like the papery and it's like almost like a candy inside. So we'll keep those things, and then mints and stuff along the pathways. So as the children are walking through, they can like nibble raw things that we know are meant to be eaten raw or easier to eat raw. But I will tell you, the children eat all the food. Like you've never seen them house a vegetarian burrito stuffed with vegetables like they do at the farm, because it's like, oh, I picked that cucumber, I grew that basil, da 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 da. Da. So yeah, it's all about the relationship. Fresh grown Brussels sprouts. Yeah, I love Brussels sprouts. They're so good. Can't wait for October already. Let's see, maybe we'll take like one or two more questions if there's anything else. And then I want to like leave you with this poem as like the last taste in your mouth for the night. So speak up if there's something you want to say that you haven't said yet. Everyone's like, give me the poem. Okay. Here we go. Let me see if I can do this. So I have to do this funny share screen thing. So just be patient with me, because to share a video without in a good way, you got to click all these extra boxes. All right, here we go.
Mama Nature told me, I am part of you. You are part of me. When we forgot, she remembered us. When we were lost, she found us. Mama Nature told me, We have more than enough to go around. She showed me a glowing paper birch on the edge of the forest on a south-facing slope, endowed to grow twice as big. With all the sunlight it could ever drink, it could tower over, shade out the rest of you. You are part of me. When we forgot, she remembered us. When we were lost, she found us. Mama Nature told me we have more than enough to go around. She showed me a glowing paper birch on the edge of the forest on a south-facing slope, endowed to grow twice as big. With all the sunlight it could ever drink, it could tower over, shade out the rest. It disperses its surplus sugars to boost the other trees instead. Could we be like that? Let go of excess, practice fair distribution of sustenance, regardless of what slope we were born on. Mama Nature taught me we are stronger together. She showed me the interspecies marriage of algae and fungi who fell in love across kingdoms, birthed a new life form, capable of making home on stone, adept at staying alive in the harshest conditions. Could we be like that? Join forces across difference, weave our powers, individual but undividable, in the midst of unthinkable circumstances, learn how to flourish together. Mama Nature taught me blackness is precious and must be respected and must be protected from artificial light and must be tended. She showed me the indigo night, the miracle of starlight, the deep dark ocean, the rich black soils brimming with life. Mama Nature taught me nothing and no one is disposable. It all goes back to the cycle. She showed me there is no such thing as a way. Not for our waste heaped high in landfills or amassing in the Pacific, not for our people deemed throwaway, warehoused in cages and open-air prisons. There is no escaping the totality of this single beating earth. There is no mistaking. All of us belong. Mama Nature told me, you are made of the same matter as stardust. Remember your connection to everything. She showed me this animate force of existence pulsing all around us, doing everything in its power to regenerate life, even in death. She showed me a hollowed out tree, still standing, long dead, a hatchery for starlings, a porcupine den, a perch for owls, a hideout for bats, a food cache for chipmunks, a nuthatch's nest. Could we feel our ancestors' love like that? Palpable and present all around us, sheltering and nourishing us, supporting our flourishing. Could we be eternal? Mama Nature taught me death energizes life. Life necessitates death. She showed me cypress seeds enclosed in cones, sealed shut with resin, the hardened shell, the trapped potential, the awakening flame, the wild inferno, the melting walls, the bursting open, the smoky wind, the scattered soaring, the free fall flight to fresh, warm soil, the open sky, the widened space to grow and grow and grow. Could we be like that? Rising from devastation, preparing the way for the next stage of thriving. Mama Nature taught me transformation is inevitable, adaptation is essential, change creates openings. She showed me how dolphins evolved dorsal fins to withstand the wild movement of the ocean, how plants befriended fungi who helped them migrate out of water, who taught them how to grow roots, who showed them how to survive on scorched land, until together They transformed the atmosphere, built soil over stone, and patiently, unmistakably changed the entire world. Could we be like that? Work together to do the unthinkable and shift the course of destiny. Mama Nature asked me, what will be your contribution? How will you partner with renewal to usher evolution? What are you willing to let go of? How are you willing to grow? Will you remember you are intrinsic to something bigger? What will you give rise to with the life force you've been given? Mama Nature asked me, can you hear me? And are you listening?
Thank you, dear one, so much for your attention and care and participation. It's been an honor to walk with you this evening.
Thank you so much. Awesome session. Beautiful. So thank you, Leah. It's been an awesome evening, and hopefully everyone's had wonderful conversations along the way. And the recording for this evening will also be available in about 24 hours too. And then also in the chat, and also will be in the post email you receive, is how to contact Leah if you did want to have any other questions asked, etc. So we hope you all have a wonderful evening, that you rest well, and that you've eaten well, and will continue to do so. We'll see you next time. Tomorrow afternoon. See ya.